All right. Hello, and a very warm welcome to everyone joining us on the webinar today. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us. My name is Ian Maddock, and I'm responsible for business development and revenue generation at MyHEAT, and I'll be hosting the webinar today. Taking a quick look, it appears like we've got a nice number of people joining us today, so thank you very much for taking the time out of your days to spend and listen to the story on our solar platform. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. Regarding the format, I'll be moderating the discussion between our two panelists. I'll be asking them some questions on a variety of solar topics. And we're really trying to look to have some time at the end of the session where we have enough time for you to ask your questions to the panelists. And with that, if you look on the bottom right of your screen there, right in the center middle on the bottom right there, you'll see the Q&A tab. If you have any questions, please type them into there, and we'll do our best to get to as many questions as possible at the latter portion of the webinar. We will be recording the webinar, and we will share the link with everyone likely early next week. That will go out. I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have a great panel for you today. Joining me are Darren Jones from MyHEAT and Google Canada's James Henry. Darren is the CEO of MyHEAT and has spent the last 5 years building on technology developed at the University of Calgary, which is really focused on making energy visible. James is the sustainability lead for Google Canada, and for the past 3 years has been leading partnerships and business development for Google's Environmental Insights Explorer and Project Sunroof. Before we get into our discussion with Darren and James, we'll just conduct a poll. We'll do a couple of these during the webinar. And if we could just get the first poll up there, please. And the question there, are you already familiar with Google's Environmental Insights Explorer? If you could go ahead and just click one of those, and we'll just give everybody a moment to click their answer. All right, I think if everybody's done with that, we can move on. And good, it looks like there's a fair amount of people that haven't heard from it, which is actually kind of a nice way to move on to the next topic. So let's get started talking with our panelists. Fellas, good morning.
Good morning.
All right, James, maybe it's good for you to start, seeing as we have a fair amount of people that aren't familiar with Google's Environmental Insights Explorer. Perhaps you could give us a little bit of an overview of that and Project Sunroof itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks Ian, and thanks for having me. So for those who aren't familiar, and good to see that some of you are, Google in the fall of 2018 released a platform called the Environmental Insights Explorer, which at its core was a platform designed to lighten the load for municipalities and cities around the world to develop a greenhouse gas emissions inventory. The platform was built in collaboration with the Global Covenant of Mayors to sort of better understand the process of compiling and submitting a GHG inventory and tracking against GHG reduction targets. And it uses Google proprietary data that we've acquired about the built environment and about people's kind of transportation habits and trends. We combine that with leading third-party data sources, and ultimately what we produce is an estimate of the emissions for a given year for a city's transportation and building sector. In addition to this, and this is where we kind of make the link to Project Sunroof here today, there's a solar potential module on that website, on the Insights Explorer. And to make it easier, I'll just say EIE going forward because it's a long mouthful. So there's a solar potential module on EIE, which also then helps the city understand what the potential is for every viable rooftop in aggregate across the city boundary if solar were installed on all of those rooftops to offset some of the emissions produced in the building and transportation sector. So as mentioned, that was released in the fall of 2018, but Sunroof has been around for longer, and Sunroof was almost the impetus for building EIE and for informing some of the insights that we put into that platform. And so to delineate, Project Sunroof arrived, built by a small team of engineers about 5 years ago. And it actually uses imagery that we acquire for Google Maps to build sort of 3D models of kind of heavy built up urban environments. And so, we build these models for Google Maps, but this team of engineers realized that you could repurpose this 3D modeling data, overlay it with some weather patterns and some image recognition algorithms to better identify a building and a rooftop's footprint. Overlay those weather patterns also to understand the solar potential for a given roof. And so, whereas EIE will give you a holistic solar potential for an entire city boundary and all the viable roofs within it, Sunroof helps you drill down to an individual rooftop to assess the potential. So this is great for analysts, policymakers, utilities, local governments, and homeowners themselves to around what the potential of a given rooftop is.
Awesome, thanks for that, James. And so, what is Google's goal with the Project Sunroof data across the world?
Yeah, so Google has had a long-standing commitment to accelerating the transition to renewable energy. We do this through our own operations and the energy that we buy and the energy that we consume. But really, both EIE and Project Sunroof come from a team within Google called Geo for Everyone. And this team, the mantra and the spirit of this team recognizes that Google has a lot of data, which if repackaged, remodeled, and pivoted slightly, could actually have huge, social impact and benefit for social good. And so the goal here really is to empower others using our technology to accelerate the transition to renewable energy. And with Project Sunroof, the way that takes shape is by saying, here's this data which helps you assess the viability of a given rooftop. And we go out and try to find partnerships with organizations and companies like MyHEAT and utilities around the world to help them get a better understanding of the solar potential within their sort of the world that they operate in. And so to date, this, as I said, this launched in the US 5 years ago, but to date we have partnerships across the UK, France, Germany, Japan, and now I'm very excited to say Canada.
Awesome, thank you for that. Darren, so we've heard James kind of explain the Environmental Insights Explorer and Project Sunroof's space within that. Can you explain to the listeners how the MyHEAT Google partnership is making the added on improvement on the Project Sunroof data?
Yeah, for sure. So really what we've done is taken that the solar potential data that James talked about that comes from kind of a byproduct of Google Maps. And we've combined that with a configurable financial and environmental calculator that can give an accurate indication of solar potential for every building in a city. So what that does is bring kind of the unique visual data that people can see in front of them on the screen, but also make it personal. And really, I think that's what makes it very interesting to homeowners and commercial building owners. In addition to that, we have an adaptable messaging platform that really helps cities and utilities own the messaging on solar. And we're continually innovating on the platform, which means that all cities on our platform get the benefit of that innovation without having to do any of the development work themselves. They can gain those advantages that other cities have worked on and worked with us to incorporate into the platform. And in the same fashion as Google's coverage and API for solar improves, the platform customers kind of automatically get that benefit built in without having to do anything else.
Awesome. Thanks. So you did touch on some of the benefits and that. Are there any other benefits that you could add on that what a city or utility would get through the partnership?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, in terms of using a platform like what we're creating for solar potential, as opposed to maybe building their own, we've already contracted with Google for access to the API. So as anybody who's ever, worked through a contract knows, that's not free. It takes time, and typically lawyers to work through a contract and sign. We've already done that. Another interesting thing about how the data is provided from Google is it's a really great API the developers can use. But the other side of that is that development work still has to be done. So in terms of building the platform, in terms of deploying it so that people can access it, all of the software licenses they're required with, to do that, we've already done that. It's been dealt with. So that's all handled when a city or utility signs up on our platform. And I think, we're trying to build this in a scalable fashion so that we can kind of spread those costs out between multiple cities across the globe, really. And so then when we get that kind of scale, that's when we make it efficient for everybody to participate.
Good. Thanks for that, Darren.
Yeah. I just picked up by saying, the contracts are signed, development's done, and that means that we can really kind of deploy in a matter of days or weeks, versus months or years that it might take to develop a platform on your own.
Fair enough.
Maybe just to add, from Google's perspective, I think for Google that the challenge lies within the scale, right? Because to truly make this sort of platform useful for everyone, it needs to take into account the local kind of electricity rates, the rebates, the local context that, if Google attempted to do it, would probably take us quite a long time to try and adapt this for every local kind of geography, utility, city, LDC. And so I think the way that you've kind of built the base platform and functionality with the option to scale that quite easily to any new geography by loading in some of the local context in your configuration, I think is just a really clean and kind of efficient implementation, and one that allows you to scale with all of that local context that even for Google that would have been a challenge, right? So I think this is exactly what we're hoping to facilitate through the APIs for others to do this developmental work and build platforms which can scale easily for the benefit of anyone who wants to try and accelerate toward renewable energy.
Awesome. Thanks for that, fellas. With that, we'll go to our second poll question. Does your city or utility have a goal to increase the number of solar installations in your area? I'll just give people a moment to answer that question. All right, if we could get the results on that. Excellent. Looks like there's a really good mix there of people who have programs but don't have incentives, people that have incentive programs available, and few that it's not a goal yet, but that's fine. So great, thanks for those responses. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk a bit about rapid response and changing attitudes, which is something that we've all experienced kind of very abruptly over the last few months. If there's one thing that's been very evident over the past few months is that the pandemic has shown us that a mass response is possible. However, to avoid catastrophe, we need to plan ahead and listen to warning signs when it comes to things like the climate crisis. So with that in mind, and I would like to get both your perspectives on this. So maybe I'll start with James. Do you think the global health crisis, which is very much still with us, will change the narrative and mindset of citizens and global leaders with regards to the climate change topic?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a big question too. I hope that the answer at the end of all this is yes, but in my opinion, I really think that it will change kind of global perspectives and opinions. The past couple of months has shown that we've all seen media coverage and or firsthand experiences lived of clearer skies and of more abundant wildlife showing up in urban areas where they never were before, and cleaner, clearer water supplies. And so I think if anything, the pandemic has given people a glimpse of what's possible. And, as unfortunate as it is, I think seeing is believing. And so now that I think more people now believe that, a healthy and clean environment around them is possible. And I don't think anyone's going to be in a hurry to let that go or to give that up. So, I think the early signs are there that perspectives are shifting, and that this is possible. And I think we've seen what's possible, and hopefully people don't want to let go of that, and there's action that follows. And I actually came across a study, a very recent study conducted by Global Web Index. So they poll kind of internet users all around the world. Their recent study identified that 1 in 3 Canadians identify as a post-COVID environmentalist. So to clarify on that meaning, it means as a result of the COVID pandemic, they believe it's more important now than ever before to take some form of sustainable action, particularly with respect to minimizing your own carbon footprint. And so I think solar can be a really fantastic way to do that. And hopefully platforms like this help people understand the potential for solar.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks for that, James. I've been reading some very similar articles, and you can see where there's already some governments that are really stepping up and really talking about sort of a green stimulus going forward, which is great to hear, and hopefully they do follow up with that. Darren, I'd like to get your perspective on that question as well.
Yeah, I think James said it well. I think in terms of whether there's going to be change in the narrative, I think there definitely will. How it changes is probably still up for debate a bit. But I think the biggest takeaway for me is that, the world has shown generally that we can make massive changes when we want to. I mean, obviously the circumstances that have led us to making those changes are not ideal, but I think similar to how people have seen on the environmental side the benefits, people are seeing that, we can make a change when we want to, when the motivation is there. And, I'm hoping that we can, learn from some of the lessons that from, the current COVID-19 and apply them to climate change, both in terms of the successes and some of the mistakes that we've made. So I think, agree with everything that James said, and then just add on that, we are seeing that we can make a massive change when we actually want to focus on it.
Yeah, nice. And to build on that, I think, there's a couple of really interesting examples in Europe. So if we in Canada or North America wanted to look anywhere and understand how some of these early changes are possible and are coming to life, Europe is a great place to look. There's a number of cities and countries that, in response to the pandemic, have introduced new policies or have abandoned old policies or proposals that were not climate positive. And there's expansion of bicycle networks and expansion of EV rebates and incentives. And so, I agree, Darren. I think we've seen that mass change is possible, but the political will needs to be behind it. And so that's where I agree as well. I think the how kind of remains to be seen.
Yeah. And Darren, going back to you, and I think James might have touched a bit on this on his response to the initial question, but do you think that the general consumer have changed their mindset about their own energy consumption as a result of what we've been kind of experiencing over the past couple months?
Yeah, I think it would be hard for people not to, and just thinking about my example and my colleagues and friends and families, our energy consumption has kind of changed radically. And, we've seen proof of that in the energy markets, and I'm not sure necessarily in terms of built energy consumption, because the energy saved from office buildings might be getting used at home with more people working from home. But I think definitely on the transportation side, I think we've only filled up our gas tanks maybe once or twice in the last 3 months, as opposed to once every week or two, and so that people, I think the interesting thing about energy is that when people start thinking about energy, it's not necessarily pigeonholed into the particular energy. So when I start thinking about energy efficiency, of my cars, that can lead into energy efficiency of your home and your building and all of those sorts of things. So I think, you know, because everybody has had their usage kind of radically impacted, I think that more people, you know, are going to put value on that. And then just going back to James's comments about the environment and the air, you know, clarity and air quality improvements, I think people are realizing that we don't have to accept pollution as part of the deal. And, you know, that's really how it kind of ties back into renewables in terms of, you know, that shift of people saying, you know, how can we get these environmental benefits and this clear air, you know, while still being able to, you know, carry on as usual in terms of the things that we want to do.
Yeah, no. And James, did you want to add anything onto that? I know you had touched on it a little bit in your original answer. If there's anything else you want to add on to that?
Yeah. I think Darren has said a lot of that really well. But I think with regard to, you know, consumers changing their mindset on energy consumption, I mean, you know, many of us have, for very good reason, being forced to and asked to kind of stay at home for the past couple of months, and that drastically changes, I think, the way that you interact with, use, and think about energy in your own home. You know, there was probably a period where people were still thinking, like, shoot, you know, I've got so much more laundry to do, I've got so many more dishes to do during the day now when I'm at home, but should I put that off until the evening? And you know, I need to save on my energy because I'm home all the time now. I've got lights on, I've got, you know, everything on. And you know, I'm based in Toronto, so in Ontario, the province introduced, you know, flat kind of residential rates during the pandemic. And so I think, if anything, that's another tangible way that interacts with homeowners, you know, consumers of energy. I think especially if it relates to their wallet, you know, people are definitely more in tune with what's happening. And so, yeah, I think definitely during this pandemic, after the pandemic, I think and I hope that people's perceptions with regard to the energy they consume will be different, and that this kind of groundswell of different thinking can contribute towards policy decisions and new incentives that are beneficial for the environment that we all want to see.
Awesome. Yeah, I know in our house, we get a couple of interesting things. One, we kind of measure now our fuel consumption for our vehicles in weeks. So now when we talk about it, we get 3 weeks per liter is what we talk about with regards to our vehicle use, because we're just not using them that much. And then as a dad with a 20-year-old and an 18-year-old, I seem to, my only exercise that I've got during the lockdown is following behind them and turning off lights. So yeah, so it's very much a topic of discussion in our house as well. Okay, from that, we're gonna go to our third polling question. For those in communities that are trying to increase solar installation, are you encouraging community solar gardens, encouraging residential rooftop solar installations, encouraging commercial rooftop solar installations, or encouraging all types of solar installations? Just give you a moment to answer those. All right, if we could get the results for that. Interesting. Some great results. So 6% encouraging community solar gardens, 18% encouraging residential rooftop, 32 for commercial, and 71 for encouraging all types. Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Moving on, renewable energy and restarting economies. As we look toward what's really going to be a slow reopening of the economy, I'd like to talk a little bit about how governments, municipalities, and utilities can leverage renewable energy to stimulate the economy. James, as cities and countries look to rebuild their economies, could this be a golden opportunity for renewable energy, specifically solar, to shine?
Yeah, another really kind of important question and conversation to have. You know, I think I'm an optimist at heart. So again, I think and I hope the answer is yes. But you know, I've been really encouraged by the sort of global conversation that I've been seeing occur with increased frequency over the past number of months. You know, I can't even count how many webinars, presentations, articles, white papers, and including our conversation today that are entitled in some way that focuses on, you know, building back better, advancing green infrastructure in a post-COVID environment. And so those are really encouraging signs that, these conversations are happening and that there's a recognition that these conversations need to happen as well. And, when you think about the intersection of economic stimulus and renewable energy, I think any government or any regional municipality that has committed in some way to combating climate crisis, especially through targets to reduce, greenhouse gas emissions, I think they all have an understanding that there will be significant infrastructure development that's required and investment that's required. And I think what the pandemic has done is just shifted the conversation around the timescale for that, right? So, for much of that infrastructure, if pre-existing plans suggested that infrastructure could take place over the next 5, 10, 15 years, well, maybe now there's a really great opportunity to bring forward some of those plans to invest in that infrastructure on a much, much shorter timescale, 1, 2, 3 years, to build the infrastructure that we need and will inevitably build anyway. But in doing so, stimulating the economy and bringing jobs to forward from the 5, 10 year timescale to today. And so I really think that that's a big opportunity. At Google, working on the EIE, Environmental Insights Explorer platform, we work closely with cities and local governments around the world. And following the kind of the first couple of weeks of the hardest impact of COVID, we reached out to some of our city partners to conduct research interviews to better understand how specifically the climate action teams and their work was impacted by COVID. And I think overwhelmingly the response that we heard was that, hey, we recognize that economic stimulus is coming or will have to come, and we really want to get upstream of those decisions. We want to make sure that we're firmly planted in line to receive some of that stimulus to build the economy and to build the infrastructure that we need to support our climate action planning, climate resiliency, and greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. And so that was also kind of really, really encouraging. But they cited that in order to get upstream of those decisions, they need data. Right. And so that's where I think there's a huge role for everyone to play. And I hope that kind of Google is able to do its small part in providing the data through EIE and at a more granular level to support those macro decisions through Project Sunroof as well. Maybe I'll close by just citing there's one study that I came across and read recently. It was conducted in 2017, so fairly recent, by folks from the University of Massachusetts. And it found that for every $1 million invested in clean energy infrastructure, 7.5 jobs are created, which compared to investing the same amount of dollars in non-clean energy infrastructure was, I think that job rate was about 2.6. So, 1 million invested in clean energy, there's a stimulus rate 2.8 times more effective than allocating those dollars to non-clean energy infrastructure. And so, I think there's a strong economic case, which will always have to be there for these decisions to be made, but there's a really, really strong environmental and environmental justice case as well. So all to say, yes, I really hope and I believe that the intersection of renewable energy and economic stimulus is becoming more evident, and that hopefully, we can enable some solid data-driven decisions to help folks get upstream of the stimulus that they know is coming.
Awesome. Yeah, no, some great points there, James. So Darren, how can MyHEAT Solar act as an economic recovery tool for cities and governments that are looking to stimulate the economy?
Yeah, before I get to that, Ian, I thought James did a really good job on that last question. I did have just one point that I might add just to build on kind of what he was saying. I think solar has some really interesting qualities that make it really attractive for economic stimulus. It's shovel ready. And every installation injects, 10 to 15,000 into the local economy. And because it can save on monthly bills, it lends itself to some interesting financing opportunities where the installation costs can be offset by those monthly savings on electricity. This means that, partial incentives can be really effective to spur activity. I also think there are various projects across the globe, that are integrating distributed solar as part of a non-wires alternative to kind of avoid those huge capital projects to support, additional energy consumption growth. So if you have a solar program that involves the utility planning, municipal support, that can be a real win for the economy, for the environment, and for building owners across. So I think solar does have some really kind of unique aspects about it that really contribute to that economic recovery.
Yeah.
Great. No, thanks for that, Darren.
So yeah, in answer to your question about how MyHEAT can add value, I think where our solar platform really shines is that it provides that visual interest from Google's Solar Flux visual. It's interesting, it's personal because I can actually see my house on the platform. And once someone is engaged with something that's interesting and personal, that's really the time that utilities and cities and governments should use to engage with them on that local education about what solar can mean for them and their community. So whether a city or utility wants to encourage residential or commercial rooftop solar or community solar gardens, or even educate them on the work the utility is doing, that's really the time to do it, when you kind of have captured their interest and made it personal for them. And if you do want to encourage solar and you have solar incentive programs, we can provide the easy button into your program intake and really allow the city and the utility to own the messaging on that.
Awesome. So if there's no designated solar incentive program within a community, can the MyHEAT platform still be effective?
Since I've been talking, I guess I'll continue on and then we can throw it back over.
Yeah, and I'll throw that to you, yeah.
Sure. So I think regardless of whether there's an incentive program or not, there are people who know about solar, who want to participate in projects. And so having the local realities of what solar looks like is beneficial both to these folks and the utility or city that may require some regulatory change in order to start integrating solar. There are definitely costs for utilities to integrate solar installations into the grid, and the utilities need the support to do that. So in a case where a city or utility isn't really set up for wide solar adoption, having our platform can really help explain why that is the case and what needs to change to make it work. In my view, it's not about how we, replace necessarily the existing infrastructure that's in place and the existing fossil fuels. It's about how we can make renewables and what we have work together to get the best possible outcome and really kind of accelerate that change.
Yeah. And James, I'd like to get Google's perspective on that question, because as you created Project Sunroof for environmental insights, presumably it was done without specific local programming in mind. So I'm kind of curious to see what your take is on that question.
Yeah, that's right. It was built without any specific incentive or rebate program in mind at all. I think to reiterate the mantra of the Geo for Everyone team within Google that built this, really the mission is to empower others using our technology to accelerate toward renewable energy. And that really starts with better understanding what the mechanics look like, better understanding what the economics do look like. If there are incentives, great. If there aren't, I think it's still important to understand what those economics look like, because you will have groups of people who are still so passionate about this, they will still adopt. You have other groups of people who will see that their roof or their neighbor's roof has huge potential, but there's no incentive in place. But maybe they can send an email to their local representatives. Maybe they have a role in local council. And so I think the mantra and the spirit there is really bring this data to as many people as possible to help understand the benefits. And in part, what we wanted to do with building the Project Centered platform 5 years ago and launching in a few US states was really make it easy and really quick for someone to understand the potential of their roof. And furthermore, to demystify and debunk some of the myths that exist around solar and those common misconceptions. So I think when people have all of the data that they need to make an informed decision, we hope that it's really likely that they'll go ahead and make that decision anyway. And whether that exists with or without a rebate, there are still various economic cases that could support it. But it would have been really difficult for Google to try and build this to account for all of many thousands of different local policies and incentives in place. And so we really just wanted to focus on, make the data and the insights universally accessible and useful, in line with kind of Google's broader mission to make the world's information universally accessible and useful, and help folks make a decision, make an informed decision very quickly and very easily.
Awesome. Thanks for that, James. With that, we're almost ready. I think we're ready for our fourth poll question. Just a reminder that if you have questions for James and Darren, to type them into the Q&A tab as well. So our last poll question has come up. Are solar installation programs a reality for your city or service territory in the next 6 months, 6 to 12 months, 1 to 2 years, or not anytime in the future? If you want to go ahead and answer those, that'd be great. All right, if we get the results on that. And again, a good mix of responses there, and looking sort of that six months to 2 year period. It looks like there's like 37% of the listeners that are kind of looking at doing something on the solar side of things. So that's really encouraging to see, and hopefully that number continues to grow. I think we're going to go into a platform demo now with Darren's going to quickly go over the MyHEAT solar platform. And I know he's recently looked at his own home on the platform. So I'm really curious to get his perspective on what he saw and what he learned, and what kind of the thoughts that went through his head on that. So I'll turn that over to you, Darren.
A second here.
And while Darren's doing that, just a reminder, please type in your questions in the Q&A tab there, so we can while we have Darren and James on the call here, we can get their perspective on stuff that's specific to your needs with your cities or utilities.
Sorry about that. I had to disable my time limit on my browser. I've been trying to reduce how much time I've been spending on my screen. Okay, I'm going to take us through a demo of the quick demo of the platform we created in partnership with Google and the City of Edmonton. This is a development environment, but it has some of the configuration from the City of Edmonton, just to show you what it looks like in a typical scenario. And the first thing you notice when you go to our platform is that we really tried to conform to the Google ethos that simpler is better. So it's really about providing a platform, where someone can find their address, where they can really kind of see what solar potential could mean for them, personalize some of that analysis, and then take the next step. So I'll just select a city here. We'll go to the City of Edmonton. We use the Google Maps API for navigation, so it's all very simple and familiar. You do get that citywide view that's similar to what you can see on Environmental Insights Explorer, the difference being here that we can actually drill down and see the potential on individual buildings. So you get that wide view, and you can kind of see the different shading, but we'll get a better view of that when we actually look at a particular building. So I'm going to go find a particular address here. So once we select our address, we start to see the really interesting visuals, starting with the solar potential shading of the rooftops that show the higher versus lower potential. So you can see, where the really bright yellow part is, that's where we have our highest solar potential, and then the dark shaded purple on the buildings, that's where the lowest potential is. And this will probably conform to everybody's view of what we'd expect to see on the south side, with a non-shaded rooftop. That's where you're going to get most of your potential. We can see here, we get some information about the usable sunlight per year. This is all pulled from the Project Sunroof API, and the amount of space that are available for solar panels. So we've got about 1,500 hours of usable sunlight and about 100 meters of available solar panels. Just as an aside, you know, I looked at my house. This is very similar to my house. I also had about 1,500 hours of usable sunlight. I was kind of curious about what different parts of the world looked like. So I kind of went to sunny California, and a house there that looked like mine was about 2,000 hours of sunlight per year. And then I went over to the place that I've been rained on the most, the London, UK, and there it was about 1,000 hours. So we're sitting kind of right in the middle of that. So once a user comes to this page, in addition to being able to see this information about sunlight and solar panels, where it gets interesting is that they can now kind of configure it to their specific opportunity. So we allow you to enter in your home's monthly electricity bill, and from that, we parse out what we expect your electrical consumption will be. In the city of Edmonton, where I'm showing, we can see that they've done some limitations in terms of their solar installs so that you actually can't create a system that creates more energy than your typical consumption. So as we adjust the size of the electricity bill, the number of recommended solar panels goes up or down. This is all generated using our solar calculator, and it's configured to use local values. So the values that are configurable on a city level include things like installation costs, rebates, electricity rates, microgeneration credits, and inflation. And the important thing to recognize is that this information is configured at a city level using local values. So this is what makes sense for this particular homeowner. In addition to all of the localized calculations, all of the links and messaging that you see here, the change for climate, the rebate details, that's all configurable by the city or utility. So if you have an incentive program, this is where you would guide people to your intake stream. If you're focusing on community solar gardens, this is where you could make your case on that being more appropriate. So once somebody's selected their utility bill, got an idea of the recommended size for solar panels, this is again where we use our financial and environmental calculator to show values that make sense locally. So the upfront cost after incentives, a number of years till payback, savings after 25 years. And then we also do the environmental benefits as well. So how many tons of carbon dioxide, trees grown for 10 years, and cars taken off of the road. Down here, again, some more links and education on solar, and this has all been set up for Edmonton. And this is the kind of information that they want to do, as well as easy buttons into the program intake. So that's really kind of a quick overview of the system. You know, it's to provide those individual values so that we can, visuals, so that we can get a good indication of what solar looks like for a particular house and really hook somebody's interest based on, you know, what their particular home looks like. I also want to quickly just draw attention to a couple of other areas. We'll just scroll over to more of a commercial building. So obviously the number of the details on the solar installation changes, and we can actually switch to a commercial view instead of a residential view. And what that does is allow us to use yet again a separate configuration file for commercial versus residential, because we know that, you know, the rates differ, incentives differ for commercial versus residential, and we want to be able to give people as accurate representation as we can. So again, things like the installation costs, rebates, electricity rates, and microgeneration credits are different for residential and commercial, and the platform can allow you to switch between those two. We also provide support for different languages. So as I mentioned earlier, we designed the solution to scale across the globe. We currently have English and French, but we can add additional languages on the fly, again, with the configuration file specific to that locality. And so that's really it in terms of the platform. Try to keep it as simple as possible, keep all of the complication behind the scenes in order to make it as simple as possible for the users. As we continue to add more cities and evolve our solar calculations, we'll be adding additional options like adding battery storage in electric cars and allowing people to see how that will impact their solar financial calculations. Anything I missed there, Ian?
No, I think that was good, Darren. And again, just a reminder, if we could, we have some questions that have come through. If people could continue to add them to the Q&A, I think some people have raised their hand. We have it set up where we need you to type those questions in. So maybe if James and Darren, if you're ready, we can answer a couple of these questions. We have a question regarding how it would work in Africa. And James, I'll probably turn this one over to you. And I'm assuming it would be down to whether Google has the API data or not. So, but if you could go ahead and respond to that one.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Ian. There's a few questions actually related to this topic. Folks asking if a list of available localities are available. Is it available in the southern U.S. also? So, you know, the answer to that question is really it depends, and it depends on if the underlying data that, as I mentioned, Google acquires primarily for Google Maps, that kind of, you know, that allows us to do the 3D modeling. If that data is available, there's quite a high chance that the fully processed data for Project Sunroof in the API is available also. You know, when it comes down to specific localities, it's sort of a case-by-case basis that will go in and assess the viability and accessibility of the data. So I think perhaps if folks are interested, you know, I see you've got on the screen right now ways to reach out, and you know, Darren, perhaps maybe you want to add a little bit to that with regard to how you can sort of quickly, you know, verify if data is available.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have the ability to look through Google's API to see where data is available. We can quickly do that. So anybody can just reach out to either Ian or myself or that solutions at MyHEAT if you want to check whether the data is available. And we can get back to you and then actually kind of show you an image as well of kind of what data exists. And then in terms of, you know, for different countries, you know, again, we designed it to be able to work, you know, across the world, so we can add in those different language supports and get it ready. So yeah, absolutely. As long as the coverage is there, we can pretty much make this live anywhere in the world.
Yeah,
awesome.
and I'll add, oh, sorry, and I just wanted to add,
No,
you know, typically the data is available for more densely populated areas. You know, it sort of makes sense if you think about it, you know, us capturing that data for Google Maps to build a 3D model of a built environment. You'll find it isn't as readily available for more rural areas. So that might be an early qualifier, but as Darren said, you know, if you reach out, there should be a fairly quick way to check that for you.
Awesome. I just want to acknowledge we did have somebody ask specifically about the southern U.S. So I guess the copy and paste answer on what you just said with regards to the southern U.S. As you answered for Africa there. So thank you for that. I did get one, Darren, this would be for you. How long would it take for my city to get a platform customized and delivered?
So really the dependencies on that are being able to configure the local conditions in. So if you already have all of the information that's available that we need to configure our financial and environmental calculators, then it can be pretty quick from days to weeks. And then, you know, once we have that information in terms of making the go live, it's really just, you know, a few days for us. So I would say anywhere from a couple of weeks to a month.
Okay, so a really quite quick turnaround when you think of the ability to get a city up and running with the platform.
Absolutely, yeah.
Awesome. Darren, again, this is another one for you. Can you speak to the approximate cost for a city to develop this platform for its community?
So again, we've developed this to be as cost effective as possible because we really envision this solution being deployed all across the globe. So what we do is we have a base cost, and then we have just an adjustment based on population for us to be able to handle the costs for hosting and for using the Google API. So you can, again, just reach out to Ian or I quickly, or to Solutions if you're interested in it for your particular city. We can do a little bit of investigation, and we can get you an answer back on the costs really quickly.
All right, we have another question regarding, is there a list of municipalities available? If the municipality is not on the list, what are the steps to get started? And Darren, I think you touched on this when you said that, if they want to reach out to us, we can let them know if we have the API available to do something. But so James, if it's not on the list, what are the steps to get started?
Yeah, so maybe the first thing I'll say is, while there is no official list, and we talked about ways that folks can reach out to MyHEAT to check the availability of the data. If you were to go to the Google Environmental Insights Explorer, there are a number of over 100 global cities present on that platform today. If you inspect the data for that city and you see the solar module data present there, that is a great indicator of data being available. So that's probably the closest thing we have to a publicly available list. So a good place to start if your city's present on EIE. If it's not, and you're keen to get your city on EIE, then feel free to reach out to myself. We can talk about that. So if your city is not on EIE, and if the data isn't available for your city or your locality, it may just require some time, right? So in the back end, Google is updating all of our technology constantly, including Google Maps, including the data that goes into it. The imagery that we do capture, that we're required to capture to build those 3D models, which helps to build the Project Sunroof API, it can be difficult to capture. You have limited windows throughout the year. It can be quite costly to capture. So it's unfortunately not a very easy solution to turn around if data isn't present. But I would say that the best thing to do is to reach out to the folks at MyHEAT to see what's available as your starting point.
Awesome. Do you provide consumers with the information on the maintenance and life cycle of the panels?
Yeah, I can take that one. Yeah, that's definitely built into our calculator. I'd have to check to see if that is a configurable portion or if we just make assumptions on that. And we actually have a really detailed FAQ as part of it. I didn't go over this when I was doing the demo, but we have kind of question marks in various spots. It provides links to additional information and a very detailed FAQ that people can go to and kind of see that type of detailed information.
Awesome. What are the plans for keeping the info up to date on things like hydro prices for the payback calculation? So as things change locally on the pricing and that impacts the installation cost.
Yeah, it's a great question. And really that's why we partner with the utility or the city in view to get this information, because that's where we'll get the information from to input that. And so as those changes happen, those can be fed right into the platform to automatically update it.
Awesome. Just taking a look, got a few more questions here. Give me a moment. Again, somebody asking about the taped version. We will have the recorded version that we'll make available starting next week, along with the slide deck. How accurate will your tool be to a real-world solar install? Payback for residential customers is non-existent in Ontario, although commercial applications seem to have somewhat of a payback. What rates are you using in the payback calculators?
So I think those were two separate questions that came through, and so I can start.
Yeah, they look kind of like jumbled together on my side here.
Yeah. So I will. I'll answer the first question on accuracy, and then perhaps Darren, you can flesh that one out a little bit. But Sunroof as an API and as a platform has been around, as I mentioned, for about 5 years. We do have a number of global partners now, and we're really excited for this partnership with MyHEAT. Through our testing and our experience, we have found that the accuracy is pretty high. What we found in some instances is that it can often also reduce the need for an early on-site assessment in order to help potential homeowners to install solar, just to get over that kind of first step and the first hump by having a reliable estimate. Real world conditions will always be a little bit different, and there's no system that's perfect, but we do strive to make sure it's as accurate as possible. And over time, we hope to make further improvements, and as Darren has mentioned, the team at MyHEAT hope to make further improvements over time as well, all of which should help improve the accuracy. Darren, is there anything you want to add on that?
No, I don't think so. I think you answered it really well. I guess maybe the only thing I will add is, due to the nature of this being public, there's also the ability there for solar installers to use it as well in coordination with the homeowner. So if somebody reaches out to, a solar installer with that, that solar installer is likely going to do a more detailed analysis prior to installation, which only makes sense. But this does give a common data point that homeowner and solar installer can talk about before having to invest in that more detailed analysis.
Yeah, and I should say the website is super clean on mobile as well. And so if I may, Darren, share out the address so folks can check it out, at least in its current form. But solar.myheat.ca is the platform, and yeah, it works great on mobile too. So if you are even just kind of sitting at home when this is available for your region, or if your installer wants to come on site and look this up quickly, they're able to do so very easily and very cleanly on mobile. So kudos for that development work as well.
Yes, thanks for that, James. We actually should have put that link up on this slide. We'll do better next time. But yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I think we're right at the top of the hour here, and respecting everyone's time that has logged into the webinar, I think we'll call it here. But Darren, James, thank you very much for your time, for your insights on solar and the environmental insights explorer explanation. James, appreciate that. Again, if people are interested in exploring something for their city or utility, you can see Darren and I's information on the page there. So again, thank you very much, everyone, for joining, and we look forward to a continuing growth in the solar market.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. Great job. Thank you, James. Much appreciated. Thank you to everyone who attended.
No problem. Have a good day, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.